Are anyway. I'm a deputy district attorney with the County of Los Angeles in the arson unit, and I'm the prosecutor responsible for presenting this case today.
Your reaction to the sentence?
I'm deeply disappointed. The judge seemed to be overly focused on building and safety, and frankly, that can't take away from the absolutely reprehensible conduct of the defendant in this case that cost Glenn Allen his life. You know, to this defendant, the things he did were just the cost of doing business. And in this case, the cost of doing business was Glenn Allen's life. And that is morally abhorrent. And I'm disappointed that the judge elected to give him probation. It is a sentence, in my opinion, that undermines any deterrent effect of other people who might create such grossly negligent, life-endangering conditions, that somehow they can blame it on somebody else, that they can blame it on a city bureaucracy who can't possibly counter all of the negligence that could happen in the city in construction, and that somehow mitigates this defendant's guilt is just wrong to me.
The calculation actually of what this gentleman will actually receive in the way of actual jail time, do we know how that's going to play out?
Yeah, he will serve on a year sentence. By law, he's entitled to 50% credit, so he will serve 6 months of that sentence, and that is assuming that the sheriff does not release him early. And I certainly would not want to see him released any earlier than is lawfully required.
So you have 6 months plus whatever he has in the way of good time credit. How much is that?
Well, he received credit for approximately 60 some days of actual time, and then another 60 days, some days of good time, work time. So that means 4 months of credit. That means he will serve about 4 more months of actual custody.
Roughly about what, 115, 120 days?
Yeah, that's correct.
Sean, the judge seemed to have a real concern about what would happen at trial in this case, based
Yes.
on the facts, and based on this specific building inspector, putting a lot of his decision on that particular individual. Your
Yes.
thoughts?
Yeah, you know, that's what trials are for. I'm disappointed that the judge, ultimately we have to be back in front of him, but if we win this at trial, that's not an issue anymore. And as I said to the court, I want to see the book thrown at this defendant. He deserves full measure of justice in this case, and we won't have the opportunity to argue for that. We did today, and the court, frankly, just wasn't hearing it. And I'm confident that 12 citizens from this community hearing the evidence in this case wouldn't be distracted by this issue, that they would be horrified at what the defendant did in this case in costing Glenn Allen his life.
How about this building inspector that testified? Would you prosecute him?
No. Building and safety isn't responsible for the construction. They can't be. It's an impossible task. They are a check in the system, but they are not the ones that built the house. And despite whatever flaws in the testimony at the preliminary hearing in this case, despite any mistakes made by building and safety in this case, those are mistakes. That's far different from what the defendant in this case did. What he did was blatantly disregard conditions that any reasonable person would have known would have killed somebody in that house.
Sean,
That's not what building and safety did.
Sean, you seem to be arguing that in building and safety made the mistakes, there was still an affirmative responsibility on whatever contractor built the home to obey codes and obey the law as part of being a licensed contractor.
Absolutely correct. That the responsibility for construction is the responsibility of the builder. And in this case, the architect, the designer, and the building was the defendant, and the builder was the defendant, Gerhard Becker. He was the one that was solely responsible for all of the grossly negligent construction in this house. And I want to be clear, we're not talking about cutting corners here and there. I'm not talking about the simple things that might happen in everyday construction. I'm talking about negligence that is so beyond the pale that nobody who does not have criminal intent would have done it. Anybody who had done that would know they'd end up killing somebody.
To be clear, you're talking about taking outdoor fireplaces and putting them indoors, correct?
Yeah, not just outdoor fireplaces and putting it indoor, which is what he did, in a 15-foot fire trough that was never meant to be in a home, but building the enclosure out of wood. Any child knows that you can't build a fireplace out of wood. It's absolutely ludicrous conduct.
Was there any possibility that you could have charged him in any other way, given that if he had put in certain things that are required by law, by safety, and then the minute that the inspector signed off, he yanked them out? Is there any way you could have gone after him for that, saying what he's done is create an unsafe condition?
Well, that's exactly what we charged in filing this manslaughter charge. Certainly there are misdemeanor building and safety code violations, but frankly, that wasn't the point of this case. I don't prosecute building and safety code violations except in cases like this one where they are so gross that they rise to the level of gross negligence and then kill somebody. That's when it's a felony. Those violations would merely be misdemeanors.
Is there a
Mr.
bad
Prosecutor,
message?
can you look at the
Judge,
cameras? Thank you.
Is there a bad message that's coming out of the judge today and what happened here?
Yeah, the problem with giving probation to the defendant in this case is that it sends the wrong message that you can blame somebody else, building and safety, whoever, and escape the full measure of justice for the defendant's own gross negligence and of Glenn Allen in this case.
Sean, can you explain, obviously the defendant wanted to plead no contest. Can you explain the process and why it is that you couldn't prevent that?
Yes, okay. So, the people have the right to file charges in these cases and then to prove them before the court. Ultimately, the court has to make the decision regarding sentencing. And if the defendant wants to admit to the charges, which is what he did today, people can't stop him from doing that. The issue then becomes what sentence is appropriate given his admission. And in this case today, the sentence was not appropriate.
Since you specialize in these kinds of cases with all the members of the fire department standing behind you, what is your concern about this case and its impact on what could be future cases down the road?
I would hope that this case is such an aberration from the norm that it would never be repeated. But certainly, by giving the defendant probation, I'm concerned that the men and women of the Los Angeles Fire Department who risk their lives every day when there's a fire in your house to come in and do everything they can to extinguish that fire, to save your property, to save your lives. For someone to knowingly, as this defendant did, place them in harm's way and then to get probation, it just sends the wrong message to these heroes. And what should be done is the strongest possible deterrent to avoid any repeat of this kind of misconduct.
Is there any action that conceivably could be taken, a letter from the district attorney's office to officials in Germany, warning them what happened here and expressing strong concern that you should watch this guy like a hawk?
There hasn't been discussion of that.
Is it an option?
In fact, he's not, even as I understand it, practicing in Germany, he's practicing in Mallorca, Spain. And so I'm sure it's a possibility.
But to be clear, you're saying probation, but he will spend 6 months
In actual
county
custody,
jail.
that's
Right.
correct.
Your thoughts
That's
on
correct.
But
Well,
less the time he's already spent.
Right, that's 4 months.
4
left.
months, right.
4 months left, that's correct. I don't want to minimize two important facts here. One is that the district attorney's office did obtain a conviction in this case, and rightfully so, and that is an important consideration in this case. This defendant was guilty, and that in itself does have value. Secondly, the defendant is going to spend time in jail. He has no criminal record, and he's never been in jail before, and I certainly hope that this is a massive wake-up call to him by having to spend at least 6 months behind bars for his misconduct. I think the sentence should have been longer, but I don't want to minimize the fact that those are two important achievements that we got in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, as long as I have all of your emails, I will email the widow's statement.
Mulvehill, Mulvehill.
And your rank at the time of the fire?
Cap 1 on Edge of 97, Glen Allen, and the rest of my crew that's standing behind me.
Your thoughts, sir?
The judge made his decision. It's one that, that's what he came up with. We're going to abide by that. We're deeply disappointed in the outcome based on the information that was given to us. The family, the members of Fire Station 97 behind me, and everybody that responded that night have a life sentence put upon us for Glenn's death. And the responsibility that I put upon myself for not bringing Glenn home is weighed upon us on a daily basis. And, there's nothing we can do to bring Glenn back. The judge made his decision. We want to thank the DA, our arson investigators, ATF, LAPD's Homicide Division for all the work that they did on this case. The question was asked, what will these guys do if called? We're there to save lives and we're there to save property. We're going to continue to make it happen. But there's guys still working today with brain injuries, neck injuries, post-stress traumatic syndrome, and they're going to live with that for the rest of their life. And I don't think 6 months in jail is worth what all these guys went through back in February 2011.
If you could talk to Mr. Becker, eyeball to eyeball, what would you say?
Well, he pleaded. He knows he's guilty. He has to live with that the rest of his life. And the judge made that very clear. And he's got to live with himself just like we have to live with ourselves. And the part that's hard, I am now Grandpa Mo Nathaniel, and it's an honor to take Glenn's spot. But it was a spot for Glenn. Valentine's Day, just before the fire, Glenn and I had a talk in the office, and if we could have got him home that night, I think once he saw his grandson being born, he was probably going to retire. He just got permission from his wife, Melanie, that day to go ahead and retire. He came back to the office. Melanie brought us a cake because it is family, and I'm deeply upset that the judge wouldn't let Captain Waters and myself talk because they said it was just for families. The fire department is a family. Our thoughts should have been able to be brought out in court. I don't know if it would have made any difference, but it would have made a lot of difference to the rest of us. But Mr. Becker has to live with it himself, and how he deals with it, that's his thing. So,
do you think there need to be drastic changes made in building and safety, the department that inspects everything?
Years ago, I was an owner builder on my pool, and these building inspectors have millions of homes with a limited amount of time to inspect. You cannot absolutely catch everything that happens out there. And that's where I think the judge absolutely missed the boat on his decision at this point in time. You can't place millions of homes on these inspectors and expect for them to catch every little bit that goes out there. Whether or not it was hidden or not, it was installed improperly. That night, if we would have gone in there and put that fire out without any mishaps, the way it was vented, it could have killed those German top models that they were sleeping indoors. That carbon monoxide was vented right into that bedroom. Unbeknownst to us, this all came out after the investigation because of Glenn's death. But if it wasn't Glenn, it was going to be somebody else. And then it would have been an international problem. But like I say, we're here to do a job, or these members are now, but they'll still go out there and they'll still do everything they can because they're professionals.
You think this sends the wrong message, this last sentence, then, to builders?
Yes.
You know,
You were
the-
there that night, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Um,
Almost every one of these men were there.
oh, really? Okay. So everybody was there.
Just about every one of these men were there that night.
Okay.
Kevin, that roof collapse was so unexpected.
It was a ceiling collapse.
Ceiling collapse, I mean. And we know, this videotape that shows it actually collapsing. What I'm wondering is, there's a certain amount of trust that you all have, right? When you respond to a fire, you expect that the buildings will not react that way. Now that this has happened, does that change your thoughts as you go to those fires and as you continue your work?
Well, it's not going to change my thoughts. I'm gone. So, but for these members, absolutely, it's going to make a huge difference. But the bottom line is, there was just our engine company in RA. There was over 150 years of experience inside that room that night, and we were pulling ceiling and we were getting beat up. It was so strong. There was no sagging. There was no telltale signs that ceiling was going to come down. And I'm not talking about ceiling comes down on us all the time, drywall. But we're talking structural members. This thing was built for soundproofing and with minimal dimensional lumbers, a 2x4 spanning 40 feet, and with 5/8 drywall, which is not normal. It's usually 1/2 inch. But for the soundproofing for this movie shoot, it created havoc for us to get through it, and that's where we lost the ability to get through it easily enough. And these 12-foot ceilings, our pipe holes are 6 feet. We're standing up on sofas, we're standing on stairs, we're standing on whatever it takes to get this fire out. And we just got the word that we were starting to make some headway. And within 2 minutes, they said it was making a run to the north. I made the decision to grab 4 guys, get up on the stairs, start opening it up. And within a minute, we heard a crack and everything came down. And it came down in one solid piece of structural members with the drywall. Drywall comes down on us all the time. That we can deal with. 1,000 square feet of structural members and ceiling, it hurts people, and everybody can attest. My guys, 41's guys, the 2 LA County guys that were going to be here, and his female firefighter who was off almost a year. The guys that are still dealing with the post-traumatic stress of that incident, doing CPR on one of your own members. It hurts. Every day it hurts.
So for people who really aren't familiar with structures and building, how shoddy construction was that? Give that some perspective.
Let me tell you, when you're inside, what you see on TV on Chicago Fire and emergency, we can't see all that. All we knew is once we were able to access that attic, we would go through, we'd see orange, you'd pull back out to go back in again, and it would disappear. And because there was 6 inches of foam insulation on top, that we were having a hard time. And because you were allowed to use such small dimensional lumber, instead of being 16 inches on center, 24 inches on center, they were 12 inches on center. So every time that we would try to punch through, we were hitting a structural member. Plus, in some places, the drywall was up to 7-inch thick. And we were getting beat up. But the bottom line is, we were getting a handle on it. We felt we had it under control, and we were going to go home that night. And everything went sideways.
Can I address that question that you asked earlier a minute? Sure. You asked about how this case might affect these members of the fire department. And I'll tell you, had Gerhard Becker complied with even one part of the building and safety code by putting in fire stops in that wall, Glenn Allen would have come home that night. There's no way these firefighters could have known that. We have to expect that people who construct homes are going to comply with the building and safety code. And what these members of the fire department are going to keep doing, what they did that very night, which is continue to go in, even though there's always unknown risks that might kill them. That's why they're heroes. They keep going in. Thank you.
Sir, can you tell us a few words about Glenn, just what kind of person he was, just, family man, and, just a few words about him, please.
Sure. Well, let me make it clear, I was only with Glenn I just transferred into that station in May, so I was only with him for 9 months. But the one thing that always made an impression upon me was Glenn, with 36 years on the job, was always the first one to start housework, was always the first one there in the morning, made coffee. He was always the one that took care of things and made things happen. And I had only met the family the Thanksgiving before when we had a Thanksgiving dinner there. And Glenn, with his church family, with his family itself, he was as good as a person as you could ever find.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the media for all your support through all of this. Thank you guys very much. We really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing the message that went out today.
Yeah, I took a bunch of photos. I don't know which ones.
Oh, yeah, the photos.